is resilience the new buzzword or a critical issue in our ministry age? It's an interesting question from a book I've been reading called Resilient Ministry. This is what the writer uses an illustration out of Lord of the Rings, and he uses a quote, "I feel like Frodo. In the Fellowship of the Ring, he's talking to Gandalf and says, 'I feel like butter spread over too much bread. I just feel like I'm tired and running on fumes.'" That's from Resilient Ministry. Well, Kirsty, Bucknell and myself are here today to think through this topic with you, and we're keen for your questions, we're keen for your interaction. I don't know what brought you to this topic. As I considered this topic, I had the following questions. Why do some people survive in ministry and some people don't? And what does survival mean anyway? Is resilience a personal quality or a characteristic that some people have and others don't? Or can we learn how to be resilient? Why is there a perceived issue with resilience in the 21st century compared to other generations? And what steps, if any, can I take to build resilience? Or is it, as Billy Ocean sang in the 1980s, just a matter of when the going gets tough, the tough get going? These may be your questions, maybe they're not. You might have other questions. We do want to hear from you. You might be here because you're not feeling very resilient right now. As you engage in a new year, embark on a new year of ministry, you're not feeling as robust as you thought you should be. Perhaps you're wondering if you're bordering on burnout. Maybe you want some tips on resilience to ensure you never get to that point of burnout. Or maybe there's a whole bunch of other reasons. Deb and Pete's seminar was cancelled, so you find yourself here. I don't know what brings you here this afternoon. Let me tell you where we're going today. First of all, we're just hoping that by the end of this seminar, you will leave having thought about your own patterns of life and ministry, areas that you might need to address to ensure you remain in ministry over the long term. But it's more than just remaining and surviving. It's thinking about how we serve in a way that's healthy and godly and faithful for the glory of God. We're going to work through our material. We don't have a handout. I don't know if we've broken conference rules at this point. I don't know what we're doing, but we don't have a handout, but we do have brightly coloured post-it notes. I hope that maybe makes up for the lack of handout. So we're going to ask a couple of our helpers to hand out some post-it notes. You might get probably about 2 per person. Just take a wad off and you can spread them amongst yourselves. Because we want you to write down your questions on these post-it notes, and then we'll gather them up at the end. Questions that from my section or questions that Kirsty will speak of later on. We're going to look at 3 areas in this area of resilience. We're going to look at stories that we're facing. We're going to do a health checkup, and Kirsty, as an organisational psychologist and somebody, she can introduce herself later, but working in this area, she can give us our health checkup, and you can see how you're going. And then later on, as I said, we'll work at the questions that you might have. So let's start with the stories that we're facing in this area of resilience. Thinking firstly of our society at large. In the 21st century Western world, where we are located, the cases of anxiety, depression and burnout are on the increase. We know that anecdotally, we may even know that personally. It's true in our schools and it's reflected in the broader community. You've probably heard some of the stats. As we think about our society in general, we know that mental illness is now the leading cause of sickness, absence and long-term work incapacity in most developed countries. Mental illness, the leading cause of sickness in the workplace in most developed countries. Mental health conditions such as depression and anxiety cost the Australian business between $11 and $12 billion annually, through absenteeism, reduced work performance, increased turnover, and compensation claims. And that comes from a study in 2014. There was an article, I don't know if you saw it, in the Good Weekend, just this weekend gone, where next to Iceland, Australia apparently has the highest rate of people taking antidepressants in the world. 45% of the population will experience a mental illness in their lifetime. 20% of adults are affected by mental illness every year. In 2014, the adolescent brain was taking in the same amount of information in a week that we were taking in a year. That's phenomenal. Anecdotally, and I probably am speaking as the wife of a school principal who comes home with situations at school, the psychologist is becoming the busiest person on the school staff team. The rates of anxiety and other mental illness in our schools is escalating. Our brains are smashed with information. Our devices are on, and we are so connected, we are unconnected. And the more and more connected we are, the lonelier and more depressed our society becomes. We hear the studies, don't we, about the effect various devices have on us, the various social media platforms and the effects they have on us and our children. And yet we can be some of the worst offenders, refusing to switch off, turn off, put away, because someone might need us. We might need to respond to something urgently. I wonder of how many of you today, how many times you've checked your phone either in one of the sessions or in the breaks. I'm guilty. I'm standing here guilty. Don't answer how many times, by the way. So that's our society. That's the mix we're in at the moment. It's not good news. It doesn't sound very good. But what about the church? Well, there's been some big studies done, particularly in the US. And Christopher Ash says in his book, in the US, about 1,500 people leave pastoral ministry each month due to burnout, conflict, or moral failure. 1/3 of pastors say they feel burned out within 5 years of starting ministry, and half the pastors and their wives say they've experienced depression or burnout to the extent that they have had to take leave of absence from ministry. This is significant. Again, from another study from the US, through the Fuller Institute of Church Growth, that reported a striking statistics among pastors who responded to a survey they put out. 80% indicated that ministry had affected their families negatively. 50% dropped out of full-time ministry within 5 years. 70% reported not having a close friend. 37% acknowledged having been involved in inappropriate sexual behaviour with someone in the church. And 12% confessed to having engaged in sexual intercourse with a church member. There's alarming statistics. Well, so what are the issues facing those in Christian ministry, church work? David Forney wrote A Calm in the Tempest, Developing Resilience in Religious Leaders. And he suggests there are 3 acute adversities clergy, church workers face today. First of all, the mental health workload. Secondly, role ambiguity. And thirdly, the diffused boundaries between clergy or ministers and their congregations. Up on the screen for you. Forney says, conflict in the church and in the home, role ambiguity and role overload, chronic familial stress stemming from low income and long work hours, and profound loneliness all contribute to overstressed and burned out clergy. Grant Bickerton from 2014 argues there are 4 job demands that are major causes of strain among religious workers. And again, they're on the screen there. Role ambiguity, interpersonal conflict, and conflict, of course, if you've experienced it or know of those who have, is a huge issue in the life of a church worker. Work-home interference and work overload. They are all 4 job demands that are major causes of strain among church workers. It's cheery, isn't it? We're going well. Everybody feeling up at the end of the day. Before we think more about burnout, it is important that we define what we mean by resilience, what we mean about standing firm in this work. Forney, he defines resilience as the ability to recover quickly from change, hardship, or misfortune. The ability to recover quickly from change, hardship, or misfortune. And I want to add something to this. I want to add the ability to adapt quickly and recover from disappointment. Just briefly, I've been reading a book over the summer called Dealing with Disappointment by John Hindley, Hindley. And I found that immensely helpful in an issue that I think as Christians we haven't quite worked out yet. How to deal in a godly way with disappointment, not suffering, but disappointments that we all face. But that might be for another day. But resilience, the ability to recover quickly from change, hardship, misfortune, or disappointment is my addition. And when we fail to recover from these situations, that can lead to burnout. Todd Hall defines clergy burnout as a process and condition in which chronic stress from interpersonal contact leads to emotional and/or physical exhaustion. It leads to decreased productivity, dehumanised treatment of clients, marital conflict, loneliness, psychosomatic illness, and a substantial decrease in enjoyment of interpersonal relationships, both inside and outside work. Given that ministry is all about relationships, when we're faced with burnout and the effects it has on relationships, this is so significant for us. We are not people behind a desk interacting with the computer, we are interacting with one another. And if we, as a result of burnout are facing dehumanised treatment of our congregation, we're in deep trouble at that point. Of course, burnout may not lead to someone leaving ministry, but Forney argues leaves them in a maintenance mindset rather than a bringer of good news. Isn't that true? I don't know if you felt that yourself, but when you're so worn out and just dehumanising contact with people, you don't treat them as people, you are in a maintenance mindset rather than a bringer of good news. When we haven't built healthy resilience, when we face adversity such as change, hardship, misfortune, or disappointment, then we can experience burnout, fatigue, depression, cynicism, and defensiveness. We'll experience emotional and physical exhaustion in burnout, decreased productivity, decrease in enjoyment, and going into maintenance mode. One thing I'm learning as I read more about this is that resilience isn't some extraordinary trait that somebody has, that this person has it and that person doesn't. But it's part of the everyday ability to respond positively amongst situations that might prove to be challenging or difficult. Not a character trait, not some kind of thing that someone possesses and another person doesn't, but that everyday ability to respond positively. The ability to continue on, perhaps bruised, but not critically injured. Grant Bickerton says again that all personality types have aspects that are both advantageous in some situations and leave one potentially more vulnerable in others. Our personality does influence our motivation and approach to ministry, as well as our capacity to manage work stress. This does not mean that only people with certain personality types should go into ministry, but rather we should adapt how we do ministry according to our own temperamental makeup. over and above any influences of personality, he goes on to say, one's spiritual life significantly contributes to motivation and energy for ministry. And that should come as no surprise to us. Specifically cultivating, he says, a sense of what it is that one has been sovereignly placed by God in a position to do that task, together with collaborating with God in the ups and downs of seeking to do it, directly aid well-being in ministry, regardless of one's personality type. In short, isn't it just pray and read your Bible? Isn't that just what he's saying? But is it as simple as that? Is it just as simple as doing that? That idea, though, is also confirmed in a book that I've been reading. I'm sure many of you have seen it, Resilience, a Spiritual Project by Kirsty. A helpful little book. She's done a lot of work on the studies that have been produced. And in the end, she concludes, rightly I think, that ultimately having your spiritual life, having the gospel preached to you over and over, is the first step in creating resilience. Being strong in the Lord. But is that all that it takes? I'm going to stop for a second and ask you to talk to someone near you about what you already know. If you think about what makes up a godly and healthy lifestyle, I'd love you to think about what you think makes up that godly and healthy lifestyle. Talk to somebody near you, and just for half a minute or so. Which is interesting. How long ago?
It's 20 minutes from 3:30.
Probably start about 25 to. So I've probably got about 5 minutes. Yeah.
We've got a bit of time ahead of us.
Yeah. No, that's fine. This becomes the more controversial part. Okay, hopefully you've got a little list going about what is a godly and healthy lifestyle. I'm not going to ask you to yell it out, and I will say that I'm afraid probably the next things I say aren't going to be new to you. If you're coming ready to find the magic bullet, the secret solution, the unpack something that you've never... I have a feeling what I'm about to say isn't going to be news to many of you, if anyone. I want to suggest, and will suggest, there are 6 areas of life that are important to attend to if we want to think about a godly, healthy lifestyle, if we want to think about creating resilience. Here it goes. Body, soul, heart, mind, relationships, maybe this is the one, organisation. Maybe that's the one that you weren't aware of. But there's 6, body, soul, heart, mind, relationships and organisation. Having each one of these going well, having them operating together well, means we're able to approach ministry from a healthy angle. But we've got a bit of a problem because a lot of us don't approach ministry from a healthy angle, and the studies out there are showing that people are dropping out of ministry because they're not healthy. So how do we reconcile this idea of having a life going well, operating well together with all of these things in balance, plus the tension we have in ministry of giving ourselves wholeheartedly to the work, leaving nothing in the tank. What are those? I went to the tennis in Melbourne. What do they say? They left it all out on the court. How do we hold those tensions together? We've left it all out on the court for God, but I've got to manage some kind of sustainability. I've got to be resilient. I've got to keep going. I've been in ministry for scarily some 20 years now, in one way or another, and I think I've seen the best and worst of ministry experiences, both personally, but also observing others' experiences. I agree with Christopher Ash, if you've, we'll put his book up later, in his book, that the catchphrase sustainable sacrifice is a great one for us as we're thinking about ministry. But because we are who we are, holding sustainable and holding sacrifice together is a complicated business. The idea that when we read passages like the one on the board from Luke, are we really taking up our cross daily and following Christ? Well, I might be, but I'm certainly not like the saints in other parts of the world who have it much tougher and much more difficult than I do. Taking up my cross, denying myself, losing my life for Christ. What does that mean in the practical everyday of Sydney or Western world at least? Do we think that Jesus wants us to pour ourselves out in a way that we leave it all out in the court, which means we're actually rendered ineffective? I don't think so. How helpful is it for the gospel if we completely give ourselves so much that we end up collapsing in a heap and can't go on and can't keep doing ministry? Is that really what taking up your cross and losing our life means? I take it as Pete so wonderfully helped us today think through Luke and discipleship. There's a 3-step discipleship taking place here. Denying yourself. You're not the king. You're not the boss of the world. Collins taught us that in his songs, and it's true. Your life belongs to the king. Take up your cross. Independent living is now at its end. You are aligned with Christ. Your life belongs with him. You are hidden with him, we hear in Colossians, and so follow him. Obey Jesus and share in the world's rejection of him, possibly. There is nothing in this verse about wearing yourself out or flogging yourself so much that you become ineffective. Christopher Ash highlights that when we go down, we bring a whole lot of people down with us. And that's where I think his phrase, sustainable sacrifice, is so helpful. We are finite. The sooner you realise that, the sooner I realise that, I think that's the first step to kind of getting this sustainable sacrifice right. We are finite in our ability to love. We are finite in our ability to care and support. And having a defective view of taking time to be sustained and a defective view of what it means to be sacrificial will bring about ineffective ministry. The last thing I'm going to say before handing over to Kirsty, and this is a personal reflection. You can critique it all you like and challenge me on it, and I'm really happy to engage that conversation to make it sharper. And given the context of all I've said and all the statistics I gave you at the beginning, I feel a great tension in my age of ministry, my stage of ministry. My tension is that I feel that we have put the balance out and we have become so worried about sustainability, we are forgetting a little bit about the sacrifice. And I say that in the context of the statistics I raised earlier, and knowing that many in ministry, perhaps some in this room, have struggled through doing long-term ministry and the unique challenges it brings. But I feel a little bit uncomfortable at the introspection of my generation, and I'm saying this generally, and in particular on what I feel at times, what I perceive at times as the overemphasis on self-care and boundaries. I'm not saying they don't have a place, But I do feel frustrated when people in ministry, we are quick to grumble or perhaps complain about the burdens we carry in ministry without recognising the flexibilities and the privileges we have in ministry. I took a phone call a few months ago from one of my colleagues. I chose to answer it because when they ring, it's usually something fairly important. It was quite a noisy place where I was, and he said to me, "Oh, where are you?" And I said, "The gym." It was 2:00 in the afternoon. My friends working in other contexts don't have the privileges I have to sustain myself at different hours, different times of the day. I have privileges in ministry that they don't. I'm concerned that many of us are approaching ministry with the mindset of jobs, rights, needs, and protections of self. Speaking to a friend last week, he was deeply concerned that in many of the prayer letters he's receiving, they're speaking of the need to recover from the event they've just held, the mission, or the service that the person's been involved in. As another friend of mine says, "Cara, you haven't signed up for the public service. This is a whole of life thing, and yes, there are times it will be costly." Friends, I say that, and as I said, feel free to challenge me, ask me a question, rebuke me if you think I've gone too far. But I am nervous about our emphasis at the moment on sustainability without sacrifice. So I live with this tension. How do I keep pouring myself out, offering myself sacrificially for the long term? Because in reality, I too have struggled at times to maintain healthy ministry life. I think there's probably 2 points in my ministry life that I've come close to burnout. For various reasons, in various circumstances. They were difficult times, but when I look back on them, I see the gaps where I wasn't being wise in how I sustained myself as I lived sacrificially. So I'm going to hand over to Kirsty because she's going to help us think about that. She's going to help us think about what it means to live wisely as we sacrifice. The last illustration, though, I want to leave you with is something that I've carried with me in ministry. I'm still not sure if it's right, if you like, but I'll give it a go. See if it resonates with you. I think ministry is a little bit like being in the barrier reef. Has anyone been out snorkeling in the barrier reef? You go to the barrier reef and the boat drops you at a pontoon. And there you are on the pontoon or on the boat, and you swim out for a while, and then you come back to the pontoon or the boat. Every day in ministry, I'm going to swim out from the pontoon, do ministry, speak to people about Jesus, offer myself in support of those going through trial, teach the word, walk faithfully and humbly before God, I pray. But I will return to the pontoon, to God's word, regularly as needed. I'll return to the pontoon where I'll find relationships and friendships that will help me. I'll return to the pontoon to sleep, to rest, because it's exhausting out there in the water all the time. I'll return to the pontoon to make sure there's enough rest and replenishment to go off and swim in the wide ocean the next day. That's the tension I have. I'm hoping Kirsty's going to give us all the answers.
Well, there's no pressure there, is there? So, Cara has already introduced you to the idea of 6 areas that we are going to look at. And so the 6 areas are going to form the basis of our health check as we go through. Cara's given you the definition that Forney used in 2010 for resilience. This one is one that was developed by Maston originally. Resilience describes the capacity to adapt effectively to life adversity with a short-lived downturn in functioning. So, as with Forney's definition, this captures two main components of resilience, which are really helpful to consider. So firstly, that the good or positive outcomes exist despite the risk factors. Despite the adversity, there is positive outcome. And then secondly, that there is a bounce back. It's a mild disruption that we're seeing. When we're seeing resilience, it's a mild disruption that people come back from fairly quickly, a short-lived downturn. So rather than a severe downturn in functioning that requires recovery, where you might see burnout, resilience is when there's a short period and people come back quickly from that period of adversity. Okay, so two components there. And what we see from this definition is that there are a number of myths out there that Kara's touched on already as we come into resilience. But one of those myths that Crane in 2016 in her paper talks about is that some people are resilient and others aren't. Can I say it's a myth? People can build resilience. If you're feeling that you are one of those people that can't be resilient, that is not resilient, you can grow in resilience through things like greater support, taking rest, finding challenge, and developing a sense of mastery in your environment. You can develop resilience. So fear not. I've got the good news here. Kara got all of the stats, the negative stuff, and I've got the good stuff. Sorry, Kara. So that's one myth. Second myth is that resilience is rare. It's a myth. Resilience is all over. We are all here. We have dealt with various adversities through the course of our lives. We're often drawn to situations where we see a lack of resilience, but each person, as they live out their lives, develops a set of strategies for coping with difficulties, for strategies for dealing with adversities that they come across. One study in 2005 makes point of the fact that while 50 to 60% of the population have experienced a situation, a traumatic situation, potentially a traumatic situation that is just so stressful that they have been exposed to these environments all around. So while 50 to 60% of people have been in that situation, only 7 to 8% of the population ever meet the criteria of post-traumatic stress disorder. So resilience is all around us. We have developed our own strategies for dealing with stressful situations. What's important for us to recognise is to think through what our personal strategies are, what works for us and what doesn't work for us. One thing that Kara brought out very helpfully was that as we come up with these different personal strategies, those strategies are all different because we are all different. We have been through different environments and our personalities are all so different that some things that build us up, or things that build me up, may not build you up. Things that wear me out may not wear you out. We are all different. So one of the key things as we go through and look at this health check is to think about what's the mix of resources and demands that work for us, that help us to be resilient in ministry. So in terms of resources, what are the things that build you up? What are the things that fill up your buckets? We've got all of the buckets on the screens. What are the things that fill you up, that give you energy, that sustain you in ministry? On the other hand, what are the things that place demands on you? What are the things that drain you? What are the situations and environments that you find yourself in that wear you out and stress you? this table that we're looking at here is just considering different avenues where you've got high or low resources or demands. So clearly, really where we want to be in ministry and across our lives is in this situation where we've got both high demands and high resources. I don't know if that surprises you, but as human beings, we're designed to, we function best when we have high resources demanded of us, where the demand's sufficient that we're challenged to be doing new things, to becoming masters, or to develop experience and growth in those areas. But to be able to deal with those demands well, we need strong resources to support the demands. So when you're in a situation where you've got both high resources and high demands, we have a really motivating and stimulating environment. Of course, we need to be able to detach from that periodically to be able to sustain the resources that we have, but that's the best place to be. When we're thinking about burnout, that's generally where we have still very high demands but low resources. And in each situation where there are low demands, it's typically unmotivating, leads to boredom, and we're just not stimulated enough to grow. I'm sure you've been in different situations like that where you just don't have enough stimulation and it's dull and you're not very enthusiastic about anything much. So high demands are good. We also need resources to support the demands. Okay. So, how can we build the resources? We know in ministry that there are plenty of demands. We've thought a bit about some of those demands already. How can we build the resources? How can we grow in resilience? And here are our 6. Now, I've come up with these 6. I've drawn these 6 from a number of different writers on this. So Burns et al. Downstairs in the bookshop produced Resilient Ministry. Bob Burns, Donald Guthrie. He covers a number of these different areas, or they cover a number of these areas. Jackson Jordan has written papers from New Zealand, a lot of meta-analysis in looking at different resources, burnout and resilience in clergy. Grant Bickerton's work, but then also secular writers like Martin Seligman and Tal Ben-Shahar, as they cover looking at resilience and how people in general deal with or can grow in their resilience as well. So what I'd like to do for the remainder of today is just to go through each of these different areas and to think about building resources in these areas. Okay? So firstly, the physical body. I think when you started to chat with your neighbours, you might have been thinking a bit about some of these physical sides of things. What's a healthy lifestyle? These 4 things are the cornerstones of our underlying bodily rhythms. Okay, so exercise, sleep, diet, and relaxation. We need all 4 of these things at a purely physical level. We need our physical bodies to engage in ministry. So what can we do to grow our resources in this area? Exercise. Sorry, you know all of this already. Yeah, we need to exercise. Basically, people who are physically toughened through exercise are able to withstand prolonged periods of stress better than those who aren't physically strengthened. Okay? That's not news to anybody, I'm quite sure. But not only does physical fitness make for stronger hearts and lower blood pressure and lower sugar, but it also significantly decreases anxiety and depression, and it improves your sleep. Okay? Caveat. Before you start exercising, if you haven't exercised in a while, can I recommend you go and see your GP? If you haven't exercised, it's a good idea just to make sure you have all of those, a quick actual health check to make sure you're good to go for physical exercise. But we need to exercise, and you can see on the screen there, here are the Department of Health recommendations. It sounds onerous as I read through that, but it's a target to start to work towards as we start to think a bit about getting physically fit. So that's exercise. Sleep. God the Creator does not need sleep, but we are the creatures and we do. And the Creator has designed us for 7 to 8 hours of sleep in the hours of darkness every 24 hours. Okay? I've got a great long list of things here. I'm going to have to read it out. Sleep disturbance leads to reduced concentration, reaction time, and decision speed. It leads to anxiety and depression, digestive disorders, hypertension, heart disease, and obesity. It leads to higher accident rates and social dysfunction. Please go to bed at the right time. And it's partly setting up a routine, making sure that you go to bed at the same time every evening, that you get up at the same time every morning, okay? That's an important way of dealing with the stress that you face, is to have adequate sleep and to maintain that sense of routine and pattern in your life, okay? So exercise, sleep, diet, 3 meals a day from the 5 food groups and plenty of water, okay? I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. These things are reminders, and we often think, oh, well, we can cut corners because we need to be able to get on and do the ministry. But if we're thinking about the sustainable sacrifice, these are the things that will make our ministry sustainable, okay? Making sure we have those routines in place, that we're actually starting to build really good bodily rhythms for ourselves, okay? Heart attack tends to happen on Monday mornings because that's the day that over the weekend all of the patterns have been thrown out, and then suddenly your body is thrown back into the pattern of the week on Monday mornings. So make sure that you sustain those rhythms across the week, okay? I don't know what it's like in ministry. Maybe it's, I don't know, on the day after your day off. Not sure. Make sure you maintain the rhythm, the patterns that you set up. Lastly, relaxation. Now, this is one that is really often forgotten in terms of just those bodily rhythms, but we're commanded to rest. God knows what is right for us. So we need to make sure that we've got those periods of relaxation planned into both our daily, weekly, quarterly and annual rhythms, okay? You can start to recognise your own patterns of when you're going to be wearied, when you're going to be stressed, when the demands are highest, and starting to build in periods where you need to have rest as well, okay? So that's the physical side of things. As we're going through this resilience health check, think about, where am I at with my physical well-being? Oftentimes we find that this is a really great way of building resources. So when the demands are highest, if we can get out and go for a swim, not only do we see that we're actually exercising, but we're giving our brains time to reflect, to consider. As we go through all 6 of these, you'll see how closely they're all interlinked, and that one particular activity that you might participate in, say, within exercise, might actually also build one of the other areas as well. So physical is the first, or body. Secondly, soul, or spiritual. You can see the quote here from one of the participants in the Burns et al. Study that they conducted in the States. Contemplation is foreign in my vocabulary and non-existent in my life. These three areas, having a sense of significance and purpose, having time to reflect, to pray, and to be thankful to God for all he has given us, is deeply important. Work that is meaningful in the secular studies has been found to be of great significance. Those who see their work as a calling has scientifically been proved as having the highest life and work satisfaction. So going into ministry where you know that sense of calling, when you see the significance, the meaning that you have as you participate in that work, will naturally be a resource for you as you go through. That needs to be sustained though. Thinking about prayer and thankfulness, another area where the secular work has come up with a number of studies is around this area of thankfulness or gratitude. You've probably seen it in lots of your kids' school books and that sort of thing. Attitude of gratitude, all of that sort of thing. This is a huge area, and one I think as Christians we often forget as being a real resource for us. One of the studies that has been proven to have been of great value is a very simple task. And this might be something for you as you're thinking about growing resources in the spiritual realm or sphere, is to write down 3 things that have gone well for you or that you're thankful for that day. It's a great tool to use to build your prayer life. But what the secular research has shown us is that if you participate in this exercise for 3 weeks, so every day for 3 weeks, writing down 3 things that you're thankful for, you are going to rewire your brain to scan for the positive. So you start to naturally look for the good and naturally look for the things that you can be thankful to God for. That's after 3 weeks of doing it. After 6 weeks of doing it, levels of depression and anxiety and a decrease and levels of well-being increase. Very simple task and great for building your prayer life, but also just so good to build our resilience, our well-being. Okay? God, who is our creator, has one of the great blessings in researching and looking at this area of resilience, particularly in ministry, is just seeing how good our God is, in that so many of these studies they're just proving up things that we have known for thousands of years, that the Bible has revealed to us, that God has taught us to live in this way. So learning to be thankful, spending time in prayer, reflecting on the calling, on the meaning that we have, is of great benefit and will build our resilience in ministry. We need to make sure we have time to do those things in our ministries. As I said, these 6 areas are really closely interlinked. And so this next one, mind, or the intellectual side of things, is really hard to pull apart from the spiritual, particularly from a ministry perspective. The interconnectedness is quite deep. So as we read the Word of God, the Spirit speaks to us. So the intellectual activity of reading the Word actually builds our spiritual resources. One study from 2012 shows that it's a meta-analysis, and of all of the studies, the finding that engaging in reading the Bible 4 or more times a week is the strongest and most reliable predictor of spiritual growth. So if you're concerned about lack of spiritual growth, the answer is in reading the Bible. Nothing new there. but just making sure that we're actually recognising that the science is proving it up as well, okay? I've got also there a piece around challenge. I won't speak to that too long, but this speaks to the idea of it's good to have challenge, it's good to have demands, and that actually builds our resilience. It helps us see our self-efficacy, but as Kirsten Burkett talks about in her book, this idea of God efficacy, that we can see God at work in us or through us as we start to engage in some of these ministry challenges as well. The heart, or the emotional side of things. Where are we at with our self-awareness? We know that we are all different. Have we spent time reflecting, thinking about how you are different from the next person? A lot of secular work done in this area around emotional intelligence or EQ, but an awareness around how I prefer to act, what my emotions are, and where I sit on a number of personality dimensions helps me understand you and where you differ from me. So thinking a bit about the impact that I might have on you and the response that you might give me. The other element of self-awareness is thinking about the context that you're in, thinking about the environment that you're ministering to and the impact that you will have on those people in that particular context. So as we're thinking about this idea of resources and demands and understanding ourself, our emotional makeup, our personality profile, if you like, what is it that fills you up? Are you a raging extrovert who loves to hang out with other people? Is it too much of it? Does your bucket get empty as you spend time with people? Is your bucket emptied when you're facing large amounts of change, or does that excite you and give you great energy? Starting to understand your own profile and the profiles of the people around you will help you as you build your understanding of the demands and resources that you require to have that sustained ministry. I think this is number 5, others, or the relational side of things. The things that we've talked about so far as we've considered what are the resources or areas, spheres of resources, if you like, that we can grow in to sustain our ministry. We've been thinking about personal resources, really, the resources that we have. And some of this will be a personal resource, but part of this is also a social resource. The support that we can have from other people will build us and grow us. Relationships are the number one predictor of mental and physical health. But we already knew that, didn't we? Because we know that we've been designed to be relational creatures. So we are created for that, and our relationships can be both a resource and a demand. But recognising which relationships are a resource, which relationships build us up, and which relationships demand from us, then that's important to recognise those two things. Importantly, we need to be intentional and deliberate about our friendships, particularly in ministry, but where many of our relationships have that element of demand in them. So what are the friendships that we have that you know that person has your back? How can you be intentional about seeing those people, spending time with those people, so that you can fill up with them, you can support them, but they can support you as well. Marriage, another one, which will be both a resource and a demand. There were demands that come from your marriages. considering those things with your spouse. What are the things that fill you up together? What are the things that wear you out? And have you got differences between you in those areas? Start to think about those things as well. Finally, the support crew. In ministry, it's vitally important that you have a support crew, that you know who those people are, who can build you up in your ministries. So if you don't already have a mentor, I'd really highly recommend finding yourself somebody who you can speak to on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be every week, maybe every month that you'll speak to that person. Perhaps get involved in peer consultation through the lifelong ministry development program that's going on. But ask for support and help from other people, making sure it's not just your spouse that is in your support crew, but you've got a variety of people. Another really helpful person to have in your support crew is a counsellor or psychologist. If you're somebody who recognises that you find the emotional side or that you suffer more from depression, anxiety, then I highly recommend that you find somebody who can help you with tips and techniques to deal with those things. You are being resilient as you see somebody like that. It's a sign of actually looking for growth and just cutting through that short-term downturn in activity or in function, okay? So seeing somebody like that will prevent the deep dip, okay? Highly recommend that you get a variety of people in your support crew, okay? The sixth area is organisation. So I've given you all these things that you should be doing, 5 things, 5 areas. How are you going to manage to fit all of this in? You're already busy. I'm just loading you up with more and more things to do, right? Yeah. Time management and personal planning is what will enable you to do these things, okay? It will free you. It will allow you to do the things that you really want to do, the things that excite and energise you in ministry, okay? I know from looking at numbers of ministry profiles that many of you are not structured, that you prefer not to be planned and organised. I would really deeply encourage you to spend time in your diaries trying to get some structure happening. Spending time with people perhaps who are in your congregations who are good at organising diaries, who are good at planning for the future, so that you can have time, so you can work out how you can spend your time building resources and managing demands. Okay? The last little part of that is that we have been talking about you in ministry, but many of you are leading ministries, and you can help other people to have resilient ministries as well. Resilience is not just about the individual. Resilience is influenced by the environment that you're in. Work environment plays a major factor in resilience as well. So here's some ideas on ways that you can help build the resilience of other people who are in your ministries. Firstly, around work design. If you, as the leader, can actively manage workloads, that will help reduce the drain on people's resilience. You can start plugging some of the holes in that bucket if you can help manage their time for them, if you can manage the demands that are on them. Okay, so that includes making sure you've got living and active job descriptions, but also that you find the right people for the jobs that you have at hand, that the things that they are doing are the things that energise them, that resource them, that they're not demands, that the tasks that they're doing are things that they love to do. You can also encourage them to take good rest from their work. Okay, and they will see that in the way that you model it as well. That's work design. Engagement. Role modelling the effective mindset is a really helpful thing. So actually thinking about difficulties that you're facing in ministry and engaging them in thinking about this in God's perspective. How can we reconsider this not as a hindrance demand, but as a challenge demand? How can we start to see God at work in this? What can we be doing to use this for the ministry, for the growth of our ministry, rather than being bogged down in more and more demands? So re-establishing, recalibrating mindset, reframing. But also things as relatively simple as promoting support seeking. Encourage people to be meeting with friends, to have a mentor, to be looking for growth and support there. Okay? Making sure you've got team meetings, one-on-one meetings, and engage them in the ministry. Under development, you can support your team, the people who volunteer with you, in their development of both their personal but particularly their spiritual resources. How can you encourage them to grow in their understanding of God? How can you help them build those resources? But you can also look for ways of finding challenge for them, for helping them to see God at work even in difficult circumstances. And then also looking for ways to access other sorts of resources. We haven't talked today about resources of time and finance, but if you can support them in those ways as well, then that will be a benefit. And then finally, in recognition. So just recognising what people have been doing, celebrating the work that's happened within the ministry, and seeing the good, being thankful for all that God is doing in your ministry, and sharing that gratitude within your team. So not for getting big-headed about what's been going on, but starting to think a bit about, we actually have some mastery happening here. God is at work through us as well. So they are 6 areas that you can be thinking about in terms of building your resources to deal with the demands of ministry. So what we'd encourage you to do is to think through and to recognise that we are all different. That my resources will be different to yours, and that's good. God will use us all for his purposes and in ministry. But recognising that we're different means that it's important for us to reflect on what are the resources and demands that we face as individuals in ministry as well. So thinking about how we can sustainably sacrifice ourselves, and what are the spheres that build us up, and what are the things that wear us out. And then once we've recognised those things, to start to implement some activities that will build those resources. Hopefully I've given you a few different ideas here on things that you can be doing. I think importantly we need to think about how do we fit that into our busy lifestyles, and think about actually structuring that into our lives. For people who are looking for more help in these areas, if you are struggling at the moment, if you're suffering from, or if you're thinking that you're heading towards anxiety or depression, if you're starting to think about, you think you might be heading towards burnout, can I encourage you to use the resources that are around to support you? The Clergy Assistance Program is for Anglican clergy and their spouses. So there's contact there. You can contact the Centre for Ministry Development, but then also Lifeline, Beyond Blue, Black Dog, and all of the other colours are around there. So do please use those resources, but there will be many other resources that you can use if you choose not to use these ones. Just to be aware that they are there and they are there to help you and the people in your teams.